Hi, listeners. Before we plunge into today's show, a little bit of news. Today's episode will be the last for Real Pirates. It's been such a wonderful journey, and I've absolutely loved discovering the truth behind the myths and unraveling the legends of these fascinating maritime menaces with you. Personally, I was particularly struck by the pirate code and how democracy seemed more prevalent on a pirate frigate in the 1700s than it did on dry land. Not to mention the surprising lack of any buried pirate treasure anywhere. We couldn't have done it without the amazing teams at Lowther and Parcast, who made this show possible. The writers, the composers, and the extraordinary editors and sound designers. Thank you all. And of course, thanks to you, dear listeners, for sticking with us and coming back week after week for more tales of skullduggery and daring-do. On behalf of everyone here at Real Pirates, thank you again for welcoming us into your ears and hearts. It's been a pleasure and a privilege. Now, let's embark on our final voyage on the high seas. It's November 21st, 1739, in Portobello, Panama. An English merchant walks briskly through the streets, calling out the name of his daughter Sarah above the din of the panicking crowds. Around him, the town is in chaos. Families are fleeing with all their possessions packed onto horse carts behind them. As most abandon the fortified port, some delay, standing on rooftops to get a better look at the drama unfolding out at sea. The middle-aged merchant has been living a prosperous life in Portobello for over a decade. His Spanish is excellent, and many of those fleeing are his friends. The news has spread like wildfire that 6 warships bearing British flags have appeared at the far mouth of the harbour and are preparing to attack. Only a lack of wind is holding them back. To his great relief, he now sees his daughter approaching through the crowd, holding hands with her governess. He escorts them safely back to his gated villa to join his wife, younger daughter, and other servants. Once certain that everyone he loves is safe, he heads out again, anxious to discover exactly what is going on. He reaches the port and sees the warships for himself. With his extensive seafaring knowledge, he assesses the armada and immediately understands the mounting terror. All 6 vessels are large warships of the line, 3rd and 4th rates by the look of it, each boasting multiple gun decks bristling with cannon. And they're all aiming directly at the Castillo de Torrojero. Known to the British as the Iron Fort, the Castillo is the port town's principal defense. It juts out into the harbor mouth and contains a heavily armed garrison of local militia. If the British expect to take Portobello, they must first defeat the Castillo. And now that the wind has changed, the fearsome-looking flotilla is close enough to launch the attack. From the tall tower of the Castillo, a plume of smoke emerges. The Spanish have fired first, and the crowds cheer to see it. But with his experience of sea battles, the merchant knows that their celebrations are premature. Within seconds, he's proven right. The lead British vessel delivers a powerful broadside to the Castillo. The sky above the harbour fills with smoke. Feeling the reverberations shake the port, the merchant turns and makes his way home. He knows that the British will make short work of the Castillo and the two other fortresses positioned beyond it. Portobello will fall. He rushes back through the cobbled streets, considering how this development might impact him. As a British national, he might be safe. He might even offer some new opportunity. But on the other hand, it could spell disaster. After all, this well-respected merchant and family man carries a dark secret. His friends in Portobello might be surprised to learn that 24 years earlier, he too distinguished himself as a young sailor in the Royal Navy. He expects they'd be appalled to know he later staged a mutiny on a British slave ship, making him an outlaw from his own country. But what would definitely shock them is that he spent the next 3 years plundering and pillaging under the black flag. Because his true name is George Lowther, the notorious pirate captain. For 15 years, his secret has been safe. As far as the world is concerned, George Lowther is dead. As one of the last great Golden Age pirates, he was consigned to the history books long ago. But now, as the British Navy prepare to land victoriously on Spanish soil, the peaceful second life that the fugitive has carefully built for himself is about to be obliterated. I'm Tom Morton, and welcome to Real Pirates, the show that dives deep into the true story behind the world's most notorious buccaneers. Join us as we set sail under the black flag, alongside such legendary figures as Blackbeard, Henry Morgan, Charles Vane, Anne Bonny, and Mary Read. We'll reveal how these marauding mariners rose to dominate the seven seas, the terror tactics they employed to overpower their prey, and what life was really like aboard their ships. Their reputations have swollen to legendary proportions, making it hard to separate fact from fiction. Who were they? Terrorists or freedom fighters? Cold-blooded killers or heroic underdogs? As it turns out, the truth is far stranger than fiction. George Lowther became internationally famous in 1724 after his story was included in Charles Johnson's widely read publication, A General History of the Pirates. That account, based on newspaper reports circulated at the time, tells how Lowther was chased down by the Royal Navy and left marooned on a desert island where, facing starvation, he eventually took his own life. But as we now know, George Lowther escaped. Lowther has been able to slink away from history's eye and create a whole new identity for himself in Panama. In the past 16 years, he has married a respectable Englishwoman, raised a family with her, and grown affluent through road building and exploitation of slave labor. But in the back of his mind, he's harbored a fear that a time might come when his true identity is uncovered. One day, he might face an admiralty court for his crimes. Mutiny, piracy, and murder. Charges of which he'd surely be found guilty and hanged. But even though the British Navy is now descending upon his home, Lowther remains calm. In fact, his survivalist mind has already begun plotting a way to use this situation to his advantage. Hours after the attack began, a Union Jack is seen fluttering over the iron fort, declaring to the people of Portobello that it has fallen to the British. It's the first action in a war that has been a long time coming, a trade war that has been escalated through attacks by Spanish privateers. Although war between Spain and Britain is not unexpected, the reason for this one is curious. It'll become known as the War of Jenkins' Ear. Dr. Rebecca Simon is a historian and author of Pirate Queens, The Lives of Anne Bonny and Mary Read.
The War of Jenkins' Ear was a war between the Spanish and the English that lasted between 1739 and 1748 and sort of coincided with the War of Austrian Succession. Now, the war had been called for quite some time before 1739. People began calling for this war around 1731 when a British merchant captain named Robert Jenkins supposedly was attacked by Spanish sailors who boarded his smuggling rig called the Rebecca and then cut off his ear. Now, there had already been warmongering for some time amongst the Navy and other Admiralty officials because the Spanish had been attacking lots of British merchant ships. And so when Robert Jenkins comes in and saying the Spanish cut off my ear, he is immediately paraded around Parliament for years. And not only this, Robert Jenkins, with this newfound fame, kind of starts traveling around London and giving talks. And he even starts showing, this is my severed ear that they cut off. It kind of becomes this whole show. And it works. So as a result, by 1739, war is declared and people start calling it the War of Jenkins' Ear because he's kind of become the mascot for this particular war. But here's what's actually quite interesting, is that in the 1800s, there was documents that were unearthed that suggested that Jenkins actually didn't have his ear cut off by the Spanish. So it's very possible that Jenkins himself was sort of propped up as kind of a mascot to create an excuse to start a war.
Given his own past, Lowther knows a ploy when he sees one. He understands that the British have wanted control of lucrative Spanish-owned ports for years. Now, it appears they are taking it. But as the following day dawns over the smouldering fort, Lowther has his own questions. Questions his life might depend on. Among the many friends he's made in Portobello is an older Englishman who works as a factor, meaning official merchant, for the British South Seas Company. This well-connected man soon tells Lowther something that will change his fortunes forever. The name of the commander in charge of the British force is Vice Admiral Edward Vernon. Lowther bursts out into a fit of laughter at the coincidence. Lowther reveals that he had served under Vernon on board the HMS Assistance over 20 years ago, when they were both much younger men. Captain Vernon had been an up-and-coming officer, and Lowther had excelled under his mentorship. But that was a lifetime ago. Several lifetimes, in fact. Still, Lowther realizes that this might be the very opportunity he's been waiting for. Swearing his friend to secrecy, he hands him a letter he has written and begs him to hand it to Vernon when he gets the chance. It's early December, just 2 weeks after Portobello surrendered to the British Navy. Out in the harbour, Vice Admiral Vernon sits in the cabin of his flagship, the HMS Burford, discussing with his officers what to do with the place now he has it. His plan was never to occupy Portobello for long. Instead, he means to tear it apart, disrupting Spanish trade and depriving their treasure galleons of a vital port. Vernon has been a driving force behind the war, and this victory will earn him the right to wage it as he sees fit. At home, he will soon be heralded as a national hero. In fact, roads across the empire will be renamed Portobello in celebration, and a new patriotic song entitled Rule Britannia will be sung in his honor. But this battle was just the opening move. Vernon needs to quickly gain a better understanding of the opposition in order to achieve overall victory. He must gather local intelligence on other ports, shipping, the terrain, and anything else that might prove useful. To this end, he has turned to the South Sea Company factors, many of whom have spent years living in the Caribbean. During one such interview, Vernon is told of a man residing in Panama who possesses especially valuable intelligence. Someone who, apparently, the Vice Admiral has met before. The factor hands over a sealed letter, advising him to read it in private. After Vernon dismisses his officers, he sits behind his desk and opens the envelope with interest. When he reads George Lowther's signature at the bottom, he is stunned. Lowther, his one-time colleague, the traitor, the famous pirate, the famously dead pirate. He rereads the letter in utter disbelief. Lowther is offering to place his vast knowledge of this part of the world at Vernon's disposal. The audacity of the man! But even Vernon realizes that as an experienced captain and someone who made a career of plundering Spanish ships, this resurrected pirate might well be invaluable to the war effort. In return for his services, Lowther wants Vernon to arrange for a full royal pardon for the capital crimes of mutiny and piracy. Craig S. Chapman is a military historian and author of Disaster on the Spanish Main, as well as a forthcoming biography of George Lowther.
This is a bold step on his part because he's living successfully in Panama, Portobello, I assume. But, he still has that sort of Damocles hanging over his head. And he figures that this might be a way to get that removed for me to continue on a decent life. But something else is at work here, too. I believe that Lowther had more ambition than just getting a pardon. I think he was working to restore his name and remove the stain of piracy from his reputation. And his plan to do that was by making a contribution to British victory in the West Indies.
Vernon folds the letter back into the envelope. If this is Lowther, he thinks, he's more brazen than ever. But despite the indelible stain of his pirate career, Vernon remembers Lowther as being a man of good character and an excellent naval officer. Plus, any man who can trick the world into thinking he's been dead for 16 years must be worth talking to. Vernon sends a secret message via Lowther's friend in the South Sea Company.
So there's no question that Vernon was interested in working with Lowther. The idea being, the bargain was that Lowther could provide crucial intelligence about the Spanish ports, their Guardacosta activities, their fortifications, the shipping information about how to navigate on the coastline, just general information about the Spanish West Indies in exchange for getting a pardon. Vernon agrees to give him safe harbor, but he puts a condition on him and say, well, you've got to prove that you've got something worthwhile for me.
It's March 15th, 1740, on the HMS Stafford in Portobello Harbor. On a misty morning, Lowther climbs the ladder of the 60-gun ship. Although it's been months since he began his original correspondence with Vernon, the two men have not yet met face to face. Vernon's fleet has been mostly based in Port Royal, Jamaica. But Lowther understands they have recently been conducting reconnaissance around the port of Cartagena de Indias, the wealthiest port in Spanish America, and the main target of the war. However, the fleet has briefly returned to Portobello for repairs, allowing a chance for Lowther to finally have an audience with the Vice Admiral. As he is escorted through the ship, Lowther is reminded of the time long ago when he served in the Royal Navy. However, when he enters Vernon's cabin, his former commander, known fondly by his men as Old Grog, does not greet him warmly. Vernon was disgusted to hear that Lowther had staged a mutiny aboard a British slave ship just a few years after they parted ways. Brusquely, he tells him so. Nor does he wish to hear any excuses as to why Lowther turned pirate. What Vernon does want is any intelligence that Lowther might have that will help him secure his next planned victory: to capture the port of Chagres. The port is positioned at the mouth of the river Chagres, which runs deep into central Panama, a known refuge for Spanish privateers. But the British are unsure of how to enter the harbour safely. "Can you help?" Vernon asks, showing him their current maps of the coastline. Lowther simply nods, picks up a pencil, and begins making corrections on the charts.
Lowther meets personally with Vernon and shares with him information about how to get into the harbor of Chagres, the disposition of the fort that's guarding the port, where the shoals are, how to get around them and get into the river. All of this delights Vernon. This is exactly the information he's looking for his next move. So he calls his chiefs together and they plan their attack on Chagres. And sure enough, what Lowther provided is perfectly accurate and helps them take the port. So Vernon comes back and he's now really enthused about working with George Lowther.
Following this second demolition of an enemy port, Vernon's campaign is looking like it can't lose, largely thanks to the intelligence provided by Lowther. Pen in hand, he makes good on his promise. He writes to the First Lord of the Admiralty. Vernon speaks warmly of the former pirate George Lowther. "I find him capable of doing greater services to His Majesty, and know him to be a good seaman and gallant man. I beg your favour to procure his pardon from our royal master." Stressing its urgency, he hands the letter to a messenger, confident that the pardon will be forthcoming. Because although the crimes that Lowther has been charged with are serious and would be met harshly during peacetime, this is a period of war, and Britain has a long history of pardoning pirates if they can apply their skills and experience for the good of king and country.
If a pirate agreed to go fight in a war or work for warships or in the Navy, it is very likely that they would be given a pardon in return for this. This was a big impetus for a lot of the British in order to gain a lot of fighting power at sea, especially as more wars began breaking out, is they were actually handing out pardons to any pirate who would agree to take it as long as they either began serving in the Navy or as privateers. And this is because they were really, really skilled sailors. And so it was felt that pirate skills would be really valuable, especially during violent periods of time, because they would need people who would be able to fight, and they would need people to know how to sail into more difficult locations. And so pirates would be really good people for this.
In July of that year, a war meeting takes place in number 10 Downing Street, London. Some of the most powerful men in the land, including Prime Minister Sir Robert Walpole, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and the Secretary of State, have gathered to discuss Vernon's progress. Admiral Wager, the First Lord of the Admiralty, is reading reports from Vernon about his success in capturing the River Chagres. Some of the assembled aristocrats murmur in amusement when told that a former pirate and mutineer provided vital intelligence that led to victory. When asked if Lowther the pirate should be granted a royal pardon in order to perform similar services, nobody raises an objection. And so, with these illustrious men acting on King George II's behalf, George Lowther is officially forgiven for both his mutiny and his piracy. And it comes just in the nick of time. Following the successes in Panama, the war takes a dire turn for the British. The fleet fails twice to take the port city of Cartagena on the coast of present-day Colombia. And now yellow fever is spreading throughout the men, decimating their numbers. But by January 1741, 21 new warships have arrived from Britain to support the war in the West Indies. These reserves also consist of 10,000 soldiers and are commanded by Rear Admiral Sir Shalona Ogle. George Lowther knows the name. Most people do. Ogle earned his knighthood and his reputation for defeating the great pirate lord Bartholomew Roberts, otherwise known as Black Bart, 19 years earlier. Lowther has also heard that one of the ship's commanders is Captain Robert Maynard, who in 1718 had hunted down and killed Blackbeard, perhaps the most renowned pirate of his age. Lowther wonders, with some anxiety, how such legendary pirate hunters as Ogle and Maynard will take to working alongside a former pirate like himself.
If a pirate hunter was emotionally far enough removed from the job, then he probably would be okay sailing with pirates. But if they were pirate hunters who had made it their living specifically to hunt pirates because they wanted to eradicate piracy, it's easy to imagine that they would have a very difficult, if not impossible, time actually working alongside pirates. It's very unlikely that no matter what, these pirates could ever be fully trusted on a ship, especially amongst other pirate hunters, because a lot of people who became pirates did so because of mutinies and taking over ships that they were sailing on. So there would be this level of distrust. It would make for a complicated relationship.
Men like Ogle and Maynard are in the minority. Most naval captains choose to avoid pirates whenever possible. But whatever they may feel, Lowther's crimes have been officially pardoned by King George. He's been commissioned as a Royal Navy lieutenant and serves as one of Vernon's trusted staff officers. These new relationships will be tested immediately, as it's Maynard's ship, the Sheerness, which will transport the Lowther family to Port Royal in Jamaica, where Vernon is stationed. However, getting out of Portobello proves difficult. The Sheerness is technically a merchant ship on a trade mission. But with the two countries being at war, the Spanish officials prove obstructive. According to Maynard's account, it's the former pirate who resolves their issues.
The trade transaction has a rough start, and he credits Lowther for greasing the wheels between the Portobello merchants and the English merchant ships that arrive at Portobello to do business with them. Apparently, Maynard didn't hold any grudges about an old pirate, because he's very complimentary when he delivers Lowther to Admiral Vernon back in Port Royal, Jamaica.
Lowther's future depends on winning over skeptics like Maynard and Ogle. As the months pass, the relationship between Vernon and Lowther also improves. Proud of Lowther's performance so far, the Vice Admiral treats his new lieutenant with a certain favoritism. When he calls for a council of war to be attended by all senior officers, he includes Lowther. Vernon tells the council that they will redirect their attention away from Cartagena and toward the capture of Santiago, Cuba. All the senior officers agree that the choice of target is excellent from a strategic point of view. The question is, how can they achieve such a victory? Once again, Lowther proves his worth.
And Lowther does something interesting. He concocts the operational plan of how to attack Santiago. And he gives this to Admiral Vernon. And it's a complex plan. It has a couple different moving parts. He first proposes landing the army a little bit windward of Santiago at a couple coves that are later used by the Americans during the Spanish-American War. Land the army there, let them do a quick march to the castle guarding the harbor entrance. When the army attacks the castle's rear, the fleet should go in at the main castle, shell it or bombard it as they sail by and enter Santiago Harbor. And Lowther's plan basically is the fort can't defend against a landward attack and a seaward attack at the same time. And if the ships move quickly enough, they can get by without taking too much damage while they pound the batteries on the castle. And he said there's no way that the castle would be able to survive a simultaneous attack.
Lowther's ambitious plan is met with loud approval among many of the senior officers. It's tactically innovative in its use of combined arms, as it coordinates naval and land forces. But for reasons unknown, Vice Admiral Vernon dismisses it in favor of his own plan. He instead wants to land the army at Guantanamo Bay, 45 miles away from the target, and have them march across southern Cuba. The senior officers respond to this idea with considerably less enthusiasm. But Vernon is adamant. It's July 19th, 1741, to the southwest of Guantanamo Bay. Lieutenant George Lowther is positioned at the front of one of 6 longboats, quietly rowing through the riverways of the southern delta. He navigates for a small company of North American Marines on a reconnaissance mission to establish the best route to Santiago. Typically, these colonial troops would wear bright red coats, but today they're garbed in mahogany brown colors to help them blend in with the swamplands. As they traverse through estuaries, Lowther considers again the workability of Vernon's plan. To expect such a large cannon-based army to move swiftly across this unfamiliar terrain without wagons, carts, or draft animals strikes Lowther as foolhardy, almost suicidal. Of course, he would never share this opinion in front of the troops. After another 4 miles, they reach a hill. Lowther suggests they climb to better survey the land ahead. At the top of the 140 feet climb, they get a clear view of the forests and savannas they must cross on their way to Santiago. It reveals an easier terrain than Lowther had expected. For a brief moment, he wonders if the Admiral's plan might work after all. His optimism is shattered by a single gunshot. The Marine stood next to Lowther crumbles to the floor, blood gushing from his throat. Lowther sees movement in the trees. A lone Spanish rifleman is running away, having narrowly missed his chance to kill a British officer. He orders his men to give chase. But the shooter soon disappears into a landscape he knows better than they do. The incident unsettles Lowther. Not the close shave with death. That he's used to. His concern is for the mission. If the Spanish can see this small party coming, then how does Vernon expect a huge army to arrive in Santiago unnoticed? The following day, a joint council meeting is called between the British land and sea forces. General Wentworth, the commander of the army, strongly opposes Vernon's scheme, which surprises nobody. The 2 commanders have been at loggerheads since the failed attack on Cartagena. Lowther is placed in an uncomfortable position. Despite agreeing with Wentworth, he wishes to remain loyal to his benefactor. After all, he owes his new life to old grog. But he begins to suspect that Vernon is losing his edge. He also wonders if Vernon rejected his plan out of a desire to not be shown up by an ex-pirate. The officers reach an impasse. Months pass. Indecision reigns. And all the while, disease rips through the British ranks. By November, Vernon abandons his plan to take Santiago, and the fleet retreats from Cuba, returning to the British station in Jamaica. It's another humiliation for Vernon, and the schism with the army is irreparable.
And Lowther's plan was the only one that was workable, and apparently nobody on either amongst the generals or the admirals was capable of putting together the plan that an ex-pirate put together. When General Wentworth finally learned about Lowther's plan, he sent a scathing letter back to London. Basically, hey, Vernon knew how to do this. He only ignored it because he wanted us to die.
It's January 5th, 1742, in Kingston, Jamaica. Having spent 6 months in Cuba, George Lowther is happy to be reunited with his wife and daughters. He's delighted to find that in his absence, they've been living a fine life in this British colony as the family of a respectable officer. Considering he used to be a wanted man, and even a dead man, Lowther can't quite believe his luck. However, he knows that if he is to truly atone for his former crimes in the eyes of the establishment, he needs to somehow distinguish himself in this conflict And at this point, Lowther suspects that the British have only one more chance to win this Anglo-Spanish War in the West Indies. Lowther takes the initiative and drafts another plan. This time, he has his sights set on a Spanish colony that he knows well, his former home of Panama. He's certain that they can capture the whole colony and sack the wealthy capital Panama City if they can just sneak up on it. They would first need to take Portobello again, and then proceed quickly through the country before word reaches the capital. It's another daring scheme, one he suspects old Grog will reject again. Vernon has proven resistant to complex battle plans, especially if they come from his pirate protégé. But Lowther is aware that others have begun to appreciate his abilities. Perhaps he thinks it is time to make some new friends if he is to secure his future.
Well, Lowther put together a plan, obviously using his intimate knowledge of Panama. And this time, he presents it not to Vernon. He goes directly to the Council of War and presents it to the generals and admirals at the same time. His plan is excellent. It's complicated, just like his plan for Santiago. It involves Army and Navy working together, a few little tricks, a spy mission that he has to lead himself. But it's a workable plan, and the council agrees that this is the plan we're going to use to take Panama.
It's February 10th, 1742, in the coastal waters of Panama. George Lowther is once again in command of a ship. Through a spyglass on the deck of what appears to be just another innocuous sloop, he spots 3 ships sailing west. To his well-trained eye, they look like British merchant ships, perfect for prey. He gives the order to attack. As his small sloop cuts through the Caribbean Sea, below decks, they prepare for the encounter. Not cutlass-wielding pirates, but well-drilled Marines. He orders the topsails unfurled, then grins to himself as they give chase. He never imagined he'd be running down honest ships again. The thrill of the hunt comes flooding back. Sailing alongside Lowther's sloop is a 6th-rate 24-gun frigate called the HMS Experiment. During his pirating heyday, Lowther would have avoided such vessels like the plague. But today, the Experiment is helping him to chase his quarry. Following a warning shot, all 3 pursued vessels immediately heaved to. Despite the British colours, no doubt these merchants must fear the worst. Pirates. And just like old times, Lowther leaps onto the deck of the nearest ship and demands their surrender. Only this time, it's in the name of King George. And surrender they do, mightily relieved to see the British soldiers and officers on deck. Lowther commandeers the vessels as part of the disguise for his spy mission to Portobello. Posing as a wealthy merchant, he enters Portobello at the head of a small flotilla of trade ships. Lowther spends the next few days establishing how well the fort has rebuilt its defenses. He also uses his local knowledge to find and recruit residents sympathetic to the British cause. Soon enough, Lowther has set up an effective spy network. On the return journey, he writes a report to General Wentworth, describing Portobello as quite defenseless, the enemy neither alarmed nor apprehensive. His plan is coming together. Lowther's proposal is met with approval from most senior officers. But as expected, the Vice Admiral objects to it. Lowther boils at Vernon's stubbornness. He strongly suspects that he is simply resentful of how Lowther went over his head and submitted his plan to Wentworth first. Perhaps old Grog feels that Lowther has been disloyal. But due to his recent failures, Vernon's star is on the wane, and so Lowther's proposed invasion of Panama is given the go-ahead for March 27th. As with the Santiago plan, The key lies in surprise, swiftness, and the pioneering use of combined forces striking at once. Victory over the rest of Panama will hinge on the Navy, led by Vernon, bringing his fleet into Portobello at the exact moment that a 500-man army appears from behind, cutting off the roads to Panama City. However, on the day of battle, Vernon completely dismisses this aspect of the plan. Rather than waiting for word that the army is ready, he steers his fleet into Portobello and attacks the Iron Fort. This rashness proves disastrous. Because the army has not yet surrounded Portobello, the Spanish governor and his 80-man squadron are able to flee into the interior. When he learns this, Lowther is furious. The element of surprise has been squandered, and because of this, Panama City will be warned that the British are coming. The invasion is called off.
The mission's a bust. And matter of fact, the generals were so discouraged by this event that they didn't even land the troops. They said, "You've ruined Lowther's plan. We're not going to play." So nothing happens. They've blown their third attempt to capture an objective in the West Indies. The Expeditionary Force eventually turns around and heads back to Jamaica. So Admiral Vernon holds responsibility for blowing up Lowther's carefully concocted plan to capture Panama.
The day after the mission into Panama is aborted, Lowther confronts his superior officer over his refusal to follow the battle plan. Outraged, Vernon explodes into a rage. "How dare a pirate question my decisions?" As Vernon proceeds to verbally abuse him, Lowther is reminded of a time decades earlier when he had served under the Royal African Company. Back then, officers had routinely berated him in a similar fashion, despite him considering them to be the incompetent ones. The thought of throwing Vernon overboard and taking the ship flickers fleetingly through his mind. Standing before the ranting Vice Admiral, George Lowther remembers why he turned pirate in the first place. Soon afterwards, the entire British Expeditionary Force is recalled to Britain, and the once celebrated Vice Admiral Vernon returns home in disgrace. But George Lowther still retains his life, pardon, and naval career. Following Vernon's departure, he continues to serve as staff officer to former pirate hunter Sir Shalona Ogle, another ironic turn in his extraordinary life. Then, in 1745, during the War of Austrian Succession, he requests leave to return to Britain for personal reasons. While he is home, the Lord Justices decide that his continued service is no longer in the King's interest, and he is placed on half pay. Unfortunately, he won't enjoy his homecoming for very long. He dies in London in October 1746. But in his final months, he must have marveled at his own good fortune. Lowther achieved the impossible, given his past, to be able to set foot back on British soil as a free man, as a respected servant of the King. It's hard to believe. Amongst the ranks of Golden Age pirates, the story of George Lowther is truly exceptional.
This is kind of why I got interested in doing this biography. The more I learned about him, the more interesting and fascinating this character became. It was just irresistible. I've got to do something about this to share with the world. Probably the most singular pirate that we've ever run across. To my knowledge, no other pirate has gone from being indicted to getting commissioned. Indicted, pardoned, commissioned. I don't think of anybody else has gone that route.
Yet somehow his exceptional tale was lost to history. For centuries, historians have accepted the Charles Johnson version of events, that the notorious pirate George Lowther died on that fatal island, meeting the same sorry end as his infamous peers. Some died at sea, like Sam Bellamy. Others were killed in battle, like Blackbeard and Bart Roberts. and a great many more met their end quivering on the gallows. But all faced justice one way or the other. Or so we thought. Until now. Over the past 50 episodes, Real Pirates has sought to bring you true stories of the most famous villains who ever sailed upon the high seas. We have debunked the myths that have dominated since their own time, challenged the romantic image crafted by authors like Robert Louis Stevenson and Daniel Defoe, and probed the incredible tales recounted by contemporary chronicler Charles Johnson, whoever he may be. Even in the 18th century, these maritime monsters attained a mythic status. Some were seen as patriotic rebels, freedom fighters, or folk heroes, righting societal wrongs at the point of a cutlass. Others, perhaps the most legendary, were rightly brandished as murderous maniacs, men that came from violent worlds and perpetuated that violence against innocent people without a hint of remorse. But we've also unearthed lesser-known tales of daring-do and terror that are even more startling than anything you'll find in the pages of Treasure Island. It seems that when it comes to pirates, the truth is indeed far stranger than fiction. So that's it from Real Pirates. If you like our brand of dramatized history and awesome sound design, then you might enjoy our other Noiser Parcast collaborations, Scotland Yard Confidential and Deathbed Confessions, also on Spotify. Or for more myth-busting tales from history, check out other Noiser Real Classics, Real Dictators and Real Outlaws. To get all the news on forthcoming shows and information on subscribing to our exclusive membership offering Noiser Plus, head over to noiser.com, that's Noiser.com, or follow us on Twitter. Thank you all again for joining us. On a personal level, I've been really touched by the wonderful feedback on social media. You can find me on @It'sTomMorton on whatever platform you favor. I'm Tom Morton, and you've been listening to Real Pirates. Real Pirates is a Spotify original from Parcast, produced in partnership with Noiser, executive produced by Max Cutler, Drew Cole, and Pascal Hughes, developed by Julian Boireau for Parcast, produced by McAllister Beckson, written by James Benmore, sound supervisor Tom Pink, edited by Carla Flores and Rob Plummer, sound design by Matias Torres Sole, mixmaster by Cody Reynolds Shaw, music by Oliver Baines and Dory McCauley.